Very happy to be here. So I founded StoryCorps about 13 years ago. Do people here know what StoryCorps is? Okay. And who doesn't know what StoryCorps is? Come on. Good, okay, a couple people. So StoryCorps started 13 years ago, a very simple idea. We put a booth in Grand. I used to make radio documentaries for public radio. And I did a lot of social justice stuff. I did stuff in prisons and housing developments, homeless shelters. And I saw that when I was in penitentiary and interviewing somebody who was serving a life sentence many, many years ago and was talking to him about his life and his dreams, that many times, he hadn't had that conversation before, and that conversation was important and sometimes transformative in his life. So I love doing radio documentaries. I did that for many years, and then had this crazy idea to do StoryCorps, which basically turns documentary and turns it on its head. Because doing a documentary, writing a book, doing a movie, is about doing a bunch of interviews and then collecting that into a piece that educates, moves people, a work of art. And what StoryCorps is about is giving as many people as possible the chance to be listened to. So we set up a booth in Grand Central Terminal where you can bring anyone who you want to honor by listening to their story, a parent, grandparent, a friend. You come to this booth, you're met by a facilitator who works for StoryCorps, you go inside, and you're in this soundproof booth. Oh, I thought maybe there was a picture of it up there. You're in this soundproof booth, this cozy space for 40 minutes, and you sit across from your grandmother, say, and you talk, you listen. I knew from making radio documentaries that the microphone gives you the license to talk about things you don't normally get to talk about. So many people think of this as, if I had 40 minutes left to live, what would I say to, what would I ask of this person who's so important to me? At the end of the 40 minutes, you get a copy, and another one stays with us, and it goes to the Library of Congress, so your great-great-great-grandkids can get to know your grandmother through her voice and story. So it started out with a booth in Grand Central, and now we're all over the country. We've had about 400,000 people participate in StoryCorps. It's the largest collection of human voices by far ever gathered. And I'm going to start by, we have this new book out that's going to come out in paperback soon called Callings. But before that, I'm just going to play one animation from StoryCorps that we just released. So as Shaka said, these are very tough times that we're in. And in the midst of the election and out of the election, we created a little series called Who We Are, which basically is about reminding us about who we are, a little bit of kind of sanity in the midst of the madness, a little ripple of hope. So this is, if you could just go to the first slide. So this is Albert Sykes and Aidan Sykes, who did an interview together in Mississippi a year ago, and this is an animation of their story.
Do you remember what was going through your head when you first saw me?
I remember when the doctor pulled you out, the first thing I thought was that he was being too rough with you. And he actually held you like a little Sprite bottle, and he was like, "Here's your baby." That was the most proud moment of my life. Don't tell your brothers, because it's three of y'all. But it was like looking at a blank canvas and just imagining what you want the painting to look like at the end, but also knowing you can't control the paint strokes. The fear was just, I got to bring up a black boy in Mississippi, which is a tough place to bring up kids, period. But there are statistics that say black boys born after the year 2002 have a 1 in 3 chance of going to prison. And all 3 of my sons were born after the year 2002.
So, Dad, why do you take me to protest so much?
I think I take you for a bunch of reasons. One is that I want you to see what it looks like when people come together, but also that you understand that it's not just about people that are familiar to you, but it's about everybody. Did you know the work that Martin Luther King was doing was for everybody and it wasn't just for black people?
Yes, I understand that.
Yeah. So that's how you got to think. If you decide that you want to be a cab driver, then you got to be the most impactful cab driver that you can possibly be.
Are you proud of me?
Of course. You my man. I just love everything about you, period.
The thing I love about you never give up on me. That's one of the things I will always remember about my dad.
You said it like I'm on the way out of here or like I'm already gone.
So, Dad, what are your dreams for me?
My dream is for you to live out your dreams. It's an old proverb that talks about when children are born, children come out with their fists closed because that's where they keep all their gifts. And as you grow, your hands learn to unfold because you're learning to release your gifts to the world. And so for the rest of your life, I want to see you live with your hands unfolded.
I was thinking when Matt, at the end of Matt's talk, he was talking about the idea that this isn't us in how we deal with eviction, how we deal with people, and he's right. And I like to think that part of what happens with StoryCorps is that we're talking about this is who we are and this is who we can be. It's about the beauty and the poetry and the grace that can be found in the stories all around us when we take the time to listen. Callings is our latest book. It's I'm really proud of it. It's 53 stories about work from the hundreds of thousands that we've recorded over the past 13 years. It kind of answers that question in 53 ways from 53 everyday people. From that Mary Oliver poem, that famous line from the Mary Oliver poem, "Tell me, what is it that you're going to do with your one wild and precious life?" It's a love letter to people whose jobs and whose work lives aren't celebrated enough in this country. There are a lot of teachers, social workers, nurses, and it's a way to say thank you. Kind of a radical book. There are no millionaires, there are no billionaires, there are no tech entrepreneurs, no politicians. 53 people who have found meaning in their work, who can teach us all so much about finding rich and fulfilling work lives. About a year and a half ago, we released, I'm excited about doing stuff on college campuses, and we've done a lot, and we want to do a lot more, especially at this moment. There's been a lot of, I've been running around a lot since the election. There's a lot of interest in StoryCorps because it's about getting people to listen to each other, to treat each other with dignity, to kind of talk across divides. And we released an app about a year and a half ago that makes it possible for the first time to do StoryCorps interviews anytime, any place. It's kind of a digital facilitator. The facilitator is the person who sits in the booth kind of bearing witness, they call it, collecting the wisdom of humanity. The app makes it possible to record stories anytime and with one tap upload it to the Library of Congress. We tried something a year ago on Thanksgiving. We had just released the app, and we decided to see if we could kind of scale the StoryCorps interview experience. And we actually did this. We haven't done anything with colleges yet, really. We started with high schools. We're ready to start working with colleges, but we created something called the Great Thanksgiving Listen, where we asked U.S. history teachers to assign their students to record an interview over Thanksgiving weekend with a loved one. And we didn't have much of a run-up, but we did a bunch of press, and we had our fingers crossed that it would work. And on the Thursday of Thanksgiving, we saw nobody really did it. And the next day, the same thing. We didn't see any interviews come in. And on Saturday of that Thanksgiving weekend, I started doing interviews with the people who had interviewed me before about the Great Thanksgiving Listen and saying, it didn't work, but it's so important that we listen to each other. We're going to keep doing this in the years to come, and we're going to make it work. And then on Sunday, we had given up, and I got a text from a staff member who said, you need to look at what's happening on the app. And there were thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of interviews coming in. In fact, 50,000 interviews in one night, which is as many as we had recorded in the first 10 years of StoryCorps combined, which was like a great piece of wisdom for me because it reminded me what you guys know so well, that kids wait until Sunday night to do their homework. I want to play a couple of, I'm going to play, let's see, how much time do we have? I have a lot of stories. I only have time for one more story. I'm going to play a story from Callings, and this is, so much of StoryCorps is about hope. It's what we can aspire to be. These are lessons. So many of the lessons in the ether now to kids are that you want to make as much money as you can, as quickly as you can, and that's what a life's work is about. And the lessons in calling are very different. It's about working hard, doing work that you care about, following your dream at all costs. And this is one of those stories from Callings. This is what happens when you have an archive as large as StoryCorps' archive. When it was the 25th anniversary of the Challenger shuttle disaster, we went to the archive to see if anyone had come in to tell a story about it, and one of the brother of one of the astronauts had come to StoryCorps to talk about his brother. So this is a story from Callings. It's Eyes on the Stars.
When he was 9 years old, Ron, without my parents or myself knowing his whereabouts, decided to take a mile walk from our home down to the library, which was, of course, public library, but not so public for black folks when you're talking about 1959. So as he was walking in there, all these folks were staring at him because they were white folk only, and they were looking at him and said, who's this Negro? So he politely positioned himself in line to check out his books. Well, this old librarian, she says, this library is not for coloreds. He said, well, I would like to check out these books. She says, young man, if you don't leave this library right now, I'm going to call the police. So he just propped himself up on the counter and sat there and said, I'll wait. So she called the police and subsequently called my mother. Police came down, two burly guys come in and say, well, where's the disturbance? And she pointed to the little 9-year-old boy sitting up on the counter. He says, man, what's the problem? So my mother, in the meanwhile, she was called. She comes down there praying the whole way there. Lord Jesus, please don't let them put my child in jail. And my mother asked the librarian, what's the problem? Well, he wanted to check out the books. And your son shouldn't be down here. And the police officer said, why don't you just give the kid the books? And my mother said, he'll take good care of them. And reluctantly, the librarian gave Ron the books. And my mother said, what did you say? He said, thank you, ma'am. Later on, as youngsters, a show came on TV called Star Trek. Now, Star Trek showed the future where there were black folk and white folk working together. Right. And I looked at it as science fiction because that wasn't going to happen, really. But Ronald saw it as science possibility. Mm-hmm. He came up during a time when there was Neil Armstrong and all of those guys. So how was a colored boy from South Carolina wearing glasses, never flew a plane, how was he going to become an astronaut? But Ron was the one who didn't accept societal norms as being his norm. I mean, that was for other people. And he got to be aboard his own Starship Enterprise.
There's a quote that I heard a while ago from a nun in Philadelphia named Mary Lou Kanacki, who's still alive. And I heard about this because Mr. Rogers used to carry this quote around on a little piece of paper in his wallet. And it says, it's impossible not to love someone whose story you've heard. These are difficult times. Your jobs are going to be particularly challenging in this confusing time in the years ahead, the tumultuous years ahead. Whether you use Callings or not, I hope you'll engage your students with StoryCorps. Have them record interviews, especially freshmen, with the app. Expose them to some of these stories, to listen to and watch these stories. Mother Teresa used to say that we've forgotten that we belong to each other. And this is a moment when all of us, especially our young people, need to be reminded that indeed we do. So thank you very much. Thanks for listening.